There was not enough pressed green juice in the entire Midwest to soothe the colons.
And this anecdote is brought to you by Olipop.
Raisin Bran in liquid form, Olipop. It runs right through you. Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals. Only one game remains. Who will be champion? I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. We were so worried that these semifinals were going to be dross, mud, slogs, come up with whatever synonym you wish. And they were not that. These were exciting, tasty. One maybe a little bit more competitive on each side than the other, but these games really, really delivered and reminded us why these were the four best teams in the league.
This was just a real treat of semifinals, and there's a part of me, maybe the inherent pessimist inside me, that says, oh no, now the final's gonna suck, because we've already been treated to the delights of two semifinals that were not obviously supposed to be great games, and instead absolutely lived up to the billing, as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
Let's start with us being a little bit wrong. Our favorites, our desired XOG final between Gotham and Kansas City is not to be.
Not to be at all.
You did pick Washington. I think both of us, in re-listening to our previews, are so ambivalent about who we expected to be finalists that I don't want to say we own gold this one, either of us.
No, we didn't. And if we own golded, and a lot of people own golded, I think a lot of people thought that Gotham had the edge here. The projection models were quite confident. Both the ELO model and the ASA model were quite confident that Washington was going to win this.
Quite confident. It was like 59-41.
59-41's a lot more confident than Kansas City, Orlando.
It's still a low confidence Yes, that's true. It's still a low confidence
Here's the thing, though. When the starting 11s came out, the great thing about the ASA model is that you can adjust the lineups to your liking. You can control the lineup that get fed into the projection. And so I always, when the starting 11s get announced an hour before kickoff, run those through the machine and see what comes out on the other side. And when I did that, Washington was like 62-38 when those 11s came out.
Okay, that's starting to get a little more, there's an edge.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you consider how fine the margins are in these contexts. 62-38 is kind of substantial when you think about the quality and the stakes. You don't often see at this point in a playoff cycle, in really any sport, margins that large. Granted, yes, it could be larger, and it's still almost 4 times out of 10 the team that ended up losing would have won. But it was a margin that I did not think the model would pick up on. It was much more aggressive in its confidence in Washington than the pundits were, and even Trevor Larner's ELO model, which gave Washington a pretty substantial edge, was still more coin flippy than ASA was. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And though it ended up having to go to penalties, the penalties certainly suggested the team who was 62% favored to win deserved it.
I attended the 2022 MLS final.
Yes.
And that game, which was a complete madhouse, and if you've never seen the highlights for it, highly recommend watching the extended highlights.
Gareth Bale, that's all you need to know.
But also just like one of the craziest red cards I've ever seen. Maxime Crepeau broke his leg.
20 minutes of stoppage time at the end of the game?
Yeah. NWSL amounts of stoppage time. And then it went to penalties, and the replacement goalkeeper for LAFC saved 2, and the third one, I think, was just missed.
Yeah.
LAFC won 3-0 on penalties. It's the only other time I can think of that I have seen a penalty shootout only last 3 rounds. I think a good place for us to begin as we break down this game is to talk about Aubrey Kingsbury, who just had herself a day. The XG on this game is 2.1 to 1.2.
Yeah.
I think the thing that is important to note here, particularly for what Aubrey Kingsbury did, is Esther does not get a shot off in the first half on what is essentially a very clear one-on-one opportunity that would have been really high XG because Aubrey Kingsbury is off her line and collapsing that chance.
Yeah.
XG, which is great at telling you the story of a season and a little harder at telling you the story of an individual game, I think understates the value that Kingsbury provided by simply not allowing shots to exist. Kingsbury was all over the place, making huge saves, playing between the lines. And when she made her one big flub of the game, as Jill Loyden hinted to, one of the most mentally tough goalkeepers didn't skip a beat.
Where this value does end up showing up is in how G Plus measures sweeping from keepers. Yes. So there is value being captured in certain metrics. It's just not showing up in the XG per se. Listen, Washington was a convincing victor on the G Plus score as well, 2.3 to 1.7. They put up 0.61 defensive G Plus, which is just them making on-ball defensive interventions. That was double Gotham's value there. But I am glad that you cited that because it should tell you that Kingsbury was making a difference elsewhere, because with the penalty shootout, we had an interesting discussion about to what extent these were bad penalties and to what extent this was a good performance by Kingsbury. I think it's a little bit more heavily weighted toward these were bad penalties, but Kingsbury was doing good things that helped swing the outcome in that shootout. But we can talk about that once we get to it. And I think sometimes at this point of her career goes a little bit unheralded. No longer.
I think that's exactly right. I think that highlighting her as master of her domain in the shootout really undersells all the little things she did to make sure Washington even arrived at a shootout. Mm-hmm. Because I think she was decisive in making sure that Gotham only ended up with one goal as much as any player on Washington was. Though, to be perfectly fair to the Spirit, a lot of great performances across the board.
Yeah.
I think the next person you have to really look at is Casey Kruger, who just had herself a day. Rosamund Kouassi had herself a day.
What a performance.
Yeah, what a performance. Immediately obvious what was sorely missed against Bay. Hal Hirschfeld had herself a day. It was the kind of performance you'd like to see from a team going into a championship week. Mm-hmm. Lacey Santos, great game. Let's just start walking through it. Early on, Gotham has kind of the first best chance of the game that Ella Stevens just barely misses. I think it heads off the post. Is that correct?
It goes off the post after Jess Carter lumps in a cross. That could have really changed the dynamic, but then Lacey Santos swings it right back the other way. I think this early passage underlined what the game was going to be like, and it was a game that we just did not think we were going to get based on how much Gotham likes to control proceedings, how close in talent quality these teams are. But this game was like very open. That Stevens header comes from a passage of transition. 2 minutes later, Washington swings it right back around on the counter through Trinity Rodman, and Santos just barely misses thanks to Ann-Katrin Berger standing tall. This was very back and forth. It was not a grind fest. It was clear that Gotham was going to use its pressure to try and win the ball high up, and Washington was not going to be cowed into slowing things down.
I thought this was a game where these two really distinct play styles were essentially in an arm wrestling match. Everyone was at maximum exertion, and nobody could sort of tilt toward their advantage in a meaningful way. Gotham conceded 50 box touches, which is outrageous for them. In 120 minutes, conceded like a seventh of the total box touches they've allowed through the season. Gotham only conceded like 300-something touches in the box this season.
Yeah.
That Washington, in 120-something minutes, got 50 of them tells you everything you need to know about not only Kouassi's effectiveness, but the effectiveness of the layered attack that Washington was laying on. And yet, Gotham was relatively comfortable. They only conceded 0.08 XG to Washington per shot.
Yeah.
So all of those box touches were still being relatively contained. And on the other end, Gotham created genuine counterattacking moments of great threat. Crucially, the Esther chance that doesn't result in a shot in the first half, where McKeown is sort of like caught out and in a bad way. At halftime of that fixture, I think the XG was something like 0.9 for Washington to like 0.3 something for Gotham. But it also didn't tell the story of the threatening chances that existed in the game.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't know if I totally agree about the consistency of Gotham's threat. I think they had a couple of moments. And in the first half, it was really like maybe two that they were able to
but it was
effectively get in behind.
What I mean, it was about, as Washington sort of exerted pressure as the home team in attack, Gotham still got to points where they were able to pounce on that pressure in counterattacks that looked very dangerous. And so I think that both teams, after sort of letting the game settle, had effective game plans that fit each other nicely.
Yeah, but I think you just citing the 0.3 XG that Gotham was able to generate in the first half also tells a pretty significant story. For whatever threat that they could demonstrate, they couldn't get good shots off.
No, again, Gotham in this game, 0.08 XG per shot.
Right.
Washington was also quite competent defensively here too. And then we get into the second half, and little 5'3" Esther, who has got to be inch for inch one of the best performing strikers against her height in the air in the world, plays what I think is an underrated masterful header because it doesn't have a ton of pace on it, so it doesn't sort of seem as dominant as it is, but the difficulty level of getting that ball with that loop that well placed in the opposite end of the net, completely misfooting Kingsbury in that one opportunity. It's like a slow happening car crash for Washington when they concede that goal.
It's like a 0.11 XG chance. She's heading across from like 11 or 12 yards out. These usually don't get scored. But her finishing score from ASA's finishing model, based on where she got the ball to cross in the goal mouth, was 0.61. She was adding that much finishing value on the quality of the shot itself.
Yeah, she added half a goal in finishing value on that header.
Which is insane. On a header from across. That's crazy.
And then suddenly you just get this feeling. I can't imagine how it must have felt in Audi Field at that moment, but Gotham, who had been a little bit on the back foot, but I think not as uncomfortable on the back foot as it had seemed, suddenly, Washington is up against one of the best teams in the league, particularly at defending leads.
They ground the game to a halt. Like if there was any passage where things sort of got stuck in, it was that half hour between the two goals.
And Gotham just tries to, at that point in the game, resist what Washington is launching forward. Frankly,
they do a good job of it.
Yeah, it does like a solid enough job of it. You have some things that you never really see. Jess Carter, we had talked about this earlier in the season about when she was signed, how much the athleticism gap that sometimes foreign players face when coming to the NWSL is meaningful. Jess Carter was absolutely keyed on and devastated by Rosamund Kouassi. Like Kouassi just had a day with Carter's athleticism.
Yeah.
Carter needs to be subbed off for Bruninia. Mandy Freeman switches sides. Mandy Freeman's dead on her feet too when they bring on Jenna Neiswanger.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you just don't see teams, particularly in playoff games, sub both of their fullbacks out.
Juan Carlos Samaros made a comment about this after the game that like some of the substitutions were driven by discipline stuff, like did not want to expose certain players to picking up cards. But you're absolutely right. I mean, like Kouassi ran Carter off the park. I mean, you look at Gotham's passing network from the second half, they're playing with a flat back five to try and absorb pressure. And some of that is game state influence. They just want to shut things down and ride out a 1-0 victory. But a lot of that too is also Neely Martin being constantly forced back by Santos and Hatch, and the same thing happening with Carter from Kouassi on that wing. It wasn't as if Washington was like presenting a ton of danger, but there was a growing sense that Gotham was going to run out of gas first. And they kind of didn't. At the same time, they couldn't get the job done based on a miraculous free kick header in second half stoppage time.
Yeah, and I think that that's where suddenly this game goes from being a tight, well-played affair to something pretty special.
Washington ends up asserting itself much more, and then, of course, really takes a hold of things when Bruninia gets sent off. And yet Gotham still manages to like burst through and have like a really good chance right at the end of second half stoppage time. It's not as if all of a sudden Gotham down a player did not find some like last gasp juice.
No, Esther has a great chance to win the game. It just doesn't come off.
Yeah.
That said, as we get to the goal, first off, I want to highlight how good Mandy Freeman was again. And we talked about the likelihood that she would start. That is one of the quieter games we have seen from Trinity Rodman. Full stop.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, no, that's fair.
It was Kouassi v. Carter that was constantly the source of problems. Rodman just was struggling to get on the ball and find space.
And was moving laterally up, down, like basically covering 4 quadrants in ways that we didn't think she would have the fitness for right at this point. But it was also not doing it as a way to frustrate defenses. It was more a way to like try and find any pocket of space that she could operate in. And she was a net negative on G+ on the day. She did not have a good game when all is said and done.
She had a really hard time. People were coming down hard on Jenna Neiswanger, who I actually thought came on and had very strong performance. Neiswanger makes what I think is a calculated foul that results in a free kick that isn't actually that dangerous. It's like a corner kick plus. You know, like if Neiswanger had not committed a foul and played that ball out for the corner kick, I don't think the chance is that different. And instead you just get great delivery from McKenna Morris and Hal Hirschfeld free in space. And Hal Hirschfeld rises. Again, we're talking about a 0.10 XG header that turns into, with Hirschfeld's power and hit, a 0.6 X place chance.
Yeah.
We have another instance where just high quality finishing keeps this game alive for Washington. In extra time, you know, Bruninia, who really feels like fell off a bit this year and is no longer trusted in the same way, just takes almost a necessary red card, a second yellow, 0 questions about it, second yellow. At that point, yeah, Gotham's holding on. They have a great Esther chance, and we end up in penalties. Did you not feel like, I felt like this, did you not feel like when Ann-Katrin got a hand on Ashley Hatch's penalty, but it still went into the net, you were like, that's the thing that you don't, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, but also, you know, how many times does that like happen on one pen and then she saves 2 more? Not saying about AKB specifically, but any goalkeeper, like these things are often just more random than we want to admit. So like the narrative would not have the same weight in our minds if Gotham had ended up winning that shootout, and that was the one wobble AKB had. But it was actually quite surprising to see her guess right on 2 of those 3 penalties, get her hand to one of them, and still concede every single one.
Yep.
It's not as though Washington was just smashing perfectly placed penalties in the low corner, making the goalkeeper guess wrong, or just hitting them with such power that there was nothing you can do. Like, they were okay penalties.
At least with the Hatch penalty, it is hit with just enough height and just enough power for that save, and placed well enough into the left side of the goal or the right side of the goal, depending on your perspective, for Berger to struggle with that. I didn't think she like biffed that. I think it was just like barely good enough to be counted as a goal. I think if Berger would, if we were talking to her right now, would probably want that back.
Yeah, I'd say so.
There are penalties that goalkeepers get a hand on and you don't expect to be finished. I wasn't that surprised that it still went in off Ashley Hatch's pen. But yeah, we end up with a kind of instant classic in this game, and a game where the margins, as they were before this game, were so thin, ever so slightly advantage Washington, and went to penalties. And in the coin flip round, the coin flippiest way to end a game happened.
Yeah.
And Washington just moved on through.
Yeah.
Evan, do you feel like we got a worthy winner here?
I think on the balance, yeah. Even though by XG per shot, you would say that this was a pretty equal match, and it's hard to analyze the majority of extra time because of the Bruninia sending off. But I felt pound for pound that Washington was a worthy winner. They did more with their chances, at least rather. Taking a higher volume of chances is more important when you want to think about like the general skill of a team. Maybe not necessarily like how a team performs on the day, but if you're level on XG per shot, but you put up double the amount of XG as your opponent, that tells me you are probably value for money there. And they had a good game plan. For all of the praises that we sing about Gotham's press, Gotham did not have many good looks. Actually, one of the things that I thought about was the way that Washington's defense kind of made Gotham's attack look like it did last year and in parts of this season. That always drives me up a wall, which is get the ball in the box and then you don't do anything with it. Aside from the Stevens chance early on, and depending on what you think of like Yasmin Ryan's chance toward the end of the second half, and then Esther's header at the sort of that last gap, they didn't really do anything that made Washington feel uncomfortable. And part of that is just that, like, Washington is a very good defensive team. If you fold in the postseason and you look at how the top four performed against each other defensively, Washington, on a per-game level, had the best defense against the best offenses this year, which I didn't expect. They're all tightly bunched together, but, like, there was some separation in terms of, like, the value of chances that Washington conceded relative to the other teams. And I think we saw that on display.
Yeah.
Like, it was a really, really tidy and unfussy defensive performance. I mean, Hal Hirschfeld just looks more and more the genuine article with each passing day. Taking Gabby Carl out and putting Paige Matire in at right back, kind of a savvy move by Jonathan Heraldez, because aside from that 8th-minute chance, like, Ella Stevens kind of didn't do anything. She did not have a lot of space to operate in. So
it was a very quiet game for Ella Stevens.
And that was also, like, Juan Carlos Amaros has been trusting Stevens more and more as the season has gone on over Lynn Williams. Part of that is because Lynn Williams, I still don't think she's 100%. He took a calculated risk in putting the responsibility of the left wing in Stevens' hands, and she just kind of couldn't hang with what Hirschfeld and Matire and Tara McKeown were throwing at her. You have to give a lot of credit to the way Washington handled themselves defensively.
Even Rose Lavelle had a relatively quiet game, just sort of from all the key component pieces that you'd hope for from Gotham. Beyond Esther, it was a relatively quiet game at points from Yasmin Ryan. It was a quiet game from Delaney Sheehan. It was a quiet game from Rose Lavelle. I think that you have to give Washington a lot of credit.
Listen to this. Lavelle didn't take a single shot all game. She didn't attempt a 1v1 dribble all game. Only got about 36 touches. Her highest point of touch density is in the defensive third. Lavelle was not able to get into the parts of the field where she is successful. And again, all the credit to the way that Hirschfeld and Heather Stainbrook just clogged up the middle. Like, if you look at the passing network, like, there is just a tidy little line of 3 or 4 around the center circle where the midfield, and then with Hatch dropping deeper, did not give Gotham a lot of space.
I thought Esme Morgan had a really nice game as sort of the last line of defense.
Mm-hmm.
Bar that little momentary breakdown with Esther in the first half, which Aubrey Kingsbury has covered, there was not a lot of room for Gotham to operate. I feel like Geralda's got his tactics exactly right. Again, if Gotham had won this game, I think the conversation we'd be having probably wouldn't be a ton different than the one we're having now. But
no, probably not.
The margins were really tight, and I just feel like Washington had better individual performances that knocked onto a better team performance on the day.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, like, they are, you know, again, we all know how close things are between the top 4 teams. I think they are and were a better team than Gotham by the slimmest of margins. And I think that comes down mostly to how more effective they could step up when transitioning into attacks. In games like this, that's enough.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Let's move on to our live streamed Sunday fixture that was supposed to be yet tighter than this very tight fixture, and ended up being, in a lot of ways, not as tight. Or Orlando's impressive victory against Kansas City. The 3rd time this season Orlando has gotten a result against Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most impressive they have been against Kansas City this season.
Oh, it's the most impressive a team has been against Kansas City, period, in 2024.
Yeah, that's right.
There have been a handful of occasions where Kansas City has allowed a worse than average amount of non-penalty XG in a game. The Pride are the only team to do it to them twice. This was a game where Temwa Chawinga was held to 0.2 XG and only 3 shots. She's had dicey games with low XG and low shot totals before, but this is the only time against the top 4 all year that she's turned in a below average performance like that. And it's important for me to underline because there has been a sentiment by some pundits, I wouldn't say this is the conventional wisdom, but the idea that Kansas City's attack is a one-trick pony, that it all runs through Chawinga, and if you isolate Chawinga and you shut her down, then Kansas City's attack dissipates. That is what happened today, but it is the only time it has happened to Temwa Chewinga all season against the top four, by which we mean the best defenses in the league. Going into the game, it wasn't a good argument to say teams now know how to beat Kansas City and it's to shut Chewinga down, because no team had shut Chewinga down. Orlando, for all of their abilities to get results against Kansas City in the regular season, Chewinga still got off big chances in those games and scored once. Same thing with Gotham. Same thing with Washington. It was only in this semifinal that a top four defense finally figured out how to do it, which is mainly have a rapidly emerging world-class center back play what might be the most disciplined game of her career. And potentially have Chewinga be not 100% fit. We can't say that for sure, but given her knee and hamstring stuff that she's been dealing with for the last few weeks, that could be clouding my perception while watching the game. I'll fully cop to that, but it felt like she was not able to get the same bursts of pace that we've seen her make in the past. You combine Sam's, you combine the defensive game plan and potentially a little sprinkling of quarter yard of pace being taken away, and this is what becomes of the vaunted Kansas City attack. Someone finally figured out how to clamp down on Temwa Chewinga.
I said on the live stream that I felt like whatever knock Temwa Chewinga was carrying was mitigated or minimized by the tactical approach Orlando came out with that really took away her best ability, which is running into space, often behind, and dominating and threatening and stretching defenses.
Getting strong side of her mark when she's got the ball and she's holding up play and spinning them and creating space for herself that way. Emily Sams did not let her do that at all, barring like maybe one moment, and that was a moment where Sams or Kylie Strom wasn't on her.
I think the key to this was several-fold. First off, Orlando's general approach, which was to say to a Kansas City team that very much likes to counterattack, here, have the ball, enjoy the ball.
Yeah.
Which Kansas City really struggled to create with for the first 30 or so minutes.
There were a lot of games in the regular season where Kansas City had a very significant possession advantage, but that was because they were playing bad teams, and it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. When you're playing a team like Orlando is now in control of things when that is the game plan.
And Kansas City really struggled to find any sort of space for Chewinga to pop up and grab the ball with threat available after said touch. If Chewinga received the ball in the middle of the park, there was Sams there, and then Strom sort of ghosting. Both of them did what I would describe as quiet defending.
Yeah, absolutely.
Almost never did you see anyone dive in on Temwa Chewinga in possession. Instead, it was about shepherding her into positions of trouble or shepherding her away from danger areas. That was masterful. That wasn't just Sams and Strom. That was across the back line as well. There was a sort of compression mode that happened almost immediately. You had both Angelina and Haley McCutcheon dropping pretty deep at times to further compress space for Chewinga. It was very focused. And I feel like Hines must have been as pleased as one can be for that first half. And then suddenly, in the 33rd minute, all of that good work is undone in a heartbeat because Carrie Abello gets a little bit caught out. Michelle Cooper finds herself open on the right flank in space. The first time that's happened for any Kansas City attacker in the game so far, and plays one of the most inch-perfect crosses across the goal mouth to an unmarked Debinha. I'll give Sams and Strom credit here. I didn't think that pass could get there either.
Yeah.
I don't blame you for giving a shoebox width of space to hit as a target.
It's almost an insult to the pass to call it a cross, because this isn't a cross the way that you're thinking. This is basically, 12 inches off the ground. It is flying completely latitudinally, but doing it in this very gentle arc that essentially finds the one lane of open territory between Morehouse and the center backs to bend around them and land right at Debinha's feet at the far post. It is very difficult to make that kind of pass work.
It's what defense contractors dreamed of when they imagined heat-seeking missiles.
Yeah.
It is a ball that is played exactly in the perfect place that doesn't allow Morehouse to come out and claim space, that doesn't allow either Strom or Sams the comfort to get a foot on it, and arrives at Debinha's foot almost to surprise her. I mean, she roofs it from 4 yards out,
Yeah.
but had she been 6 yards out, that ball's flying over the goal. Debinha barely does enough to control it.
There is tension between XG models on just how valuable the chance was. I mean, we've got at ASA a 0.11 chance. FBref has it at 0.22. I lean that it's probably higher than 0.11, mostly because I think the model is registering the pass as a cross and not understanding like actually how valuable that pass is. Debinha doesn't have to do a lot of work given the fact that she's 4 yards out and albeit at an angle, but still so close to the post that she can just sweep it forward. And of course, Debinha gets a ton of credit for the finishing too, because she's putting it, it's such a tight spot that Morehouse wouldn't have been able to get to it even if Morehouse wasn't drawn to the other side of the goal mouth.
Yeah, and so for a second time on the weekend, a team wearing white and teal grabs a lead on the road in a game that they will ultimately lose.
Yeah.
How they ended up losing, I think, is another testament to how good Orlando's game plan was, because instead of overcommitting forward or freaking out, they kind of just continue playing their game.
And that's never anything that Orlando's ever really done, especially against good sides this year, is overcommit. They're not interested in transition. That's just never how Seb Hines has bothered to construct the squad. They'll take transitions when they present themselves because they have Banda and Adriana to spring forward, as well as Ali Watt, Julie Doyle, Summer Yates, etc. But they're going to try and beat you in transition from much deeper areas of the field because they don't want to disrupt the structure. I mean, their rest defense structure is just one of the best in the league. Whether it's Haley McCutcheon or if it's Angelina, who end up getting closer, it's usually McCutcheon. There's just no worry that they're going to leave gaps. And besides the Cooper assist to Debinha, they didn't leave gaps until much later in the game when that was mostly influenced by game state.
I think what's key here and what creates the second goal is something that Banda was able to achieve that Chawinga kind of wasn't, which is creating space for other players simply with her presence.
Did that many times.
Yeah, did that so many times throughout this game. And I think Banda deserves whatever you would call a positioning assist on the McCutcheon goal.
She's got 2 positioning assists at the end of the
Correct.
day. Yeah.
And a goal.
Yeah. Right.
And
right.
I think it's worth stating on the McCutcheon goal, Banda has the full attention of Sharples and Cook.
Yep.
And Ali Watt plays across exactly as you were supposed to, hard and low, basically to the edge of the 6-yard box.
And Claire Hutton is nowhere to be found to come back in recovery.
Unlike the week before against North Carolina, where Claire Hutton was excellent, played one of the best games a defensive midfielder's played this season, Claire Hutton in this game was being asked to do something slightly different, which in turn left Ellie Wheeler really vulnerable to one-on-one play. Ellie Wheeler did not, cover herself in glory in this game, is beat for the Watt assist, and then Hutton just is jogging behind McCutcheon as McCutcheon fills the gap in the box. And McCutcheon, who did not score during the regular season, grabs her second playoff goal.
Yeah, I know.
After Banda, essentially, just by her mere presence, screens and clears out the defense. And that is a really high XG chance.
Yeah.
That is, 0.28 per ASA? I think FBref has it higher than that. And the finish doesn't even have to be that good because Schultz is on her line. Cook and Sharples are effectively on their line. And it just takes like a well-hit pass into the net. And that's all it is.
Yeah.
And we go to halftime level. And I think you and I were both probably a little concerned that we were going to slide back into the grindy way Kansas City and Orlando have played against each other so far.
Orlando and, frankly, Kansas City had other thoughts. Lola Bonta, who was questionable coming into the game and had a leg sleeve on in the first half, was subbed off, which was worrisome. I think there's this narrative emerging that, Kansas City became much more defensively vulnerable in the second half. That is to a certain extent true. The other two quality chances that Orlando had ended up being goals, and they came in the second half. But what I would say is that Labonte not being 100% also allowed for McCutcheon to have so much space to operate to get that goal. Hutton, for whatever reason, was not interested in making a recovery run, and Labonte, without being 100%, couldn't clean up after her. And so it's not as though things would have been better if Labonte had stayed on in the second half. I think given her fitness problems, there really wasn't much that Kansas City could have done, except for like maybe have Claire Hutton play better. It was actually that was a very bizarre and confusing performance, in my opinion, from Hutton on the day.
You get that kind of variance with 18-year-olds. Claire Hutton has been so good, our runner-up for the Rookie of the Year. Unlike the way North Carolina played into Claire Hutton's hands tactically, Orlando was just too dynamic and varied.
Yeah.
And Claire Hutton kind of got spread out. Again, Seb Hines, our coach of the year, and demonstrated with the way in which he deployed his midfield why. He forced Labonte and Labonte's lagging injury to sort of be spread around and run around, and he put Claire Hutton in bad positions a lot of the time.
Yeah.
We get to the second half, and we saw on the 53rd minute why Barbara Banda would have been our MVP, but for the existence of Temwa Chawinga.
Mm-hmm.
Because Banda receives a long ball from Kylie Strom that's sort of speculative, when most strikers wouldn't be able to turn and make that into a shot. Instead, just spins Sharples.
Yeah.
Cook is nowhere to be found and rifles the ball hard and low into the net.
First gets Sharples to bite on trying to win the ball on the cross. And in so doing, then can lay her out.
Creates the space.
Yeah, exactly.
And her first touch is immaculate.
Yeah, I mean, this is a touch on the half volley from a speculative cross that's taken from 12 yards. Like, it's still a lowish XG chance. FB Ref has this marker in its model called the big chance. You've probably heard this cited by people somewhere, that Opta's big chance statistic is supposed to tell you like when the really high value chances come along, but it's proprietary, and Opta refuses to explain what their parameters are for big chances. As best anybody can tell, it feels very capricious, that a chance that looked very similar to another that had been labeled a big chance all of a sudden isn't, et cetera, and so forth. So these often can jack up the XG value on moments like Banda's. But it was a hard finish, and she added finishing to it to make sure that it crossed the line. This helps me lead into another broad thing that I think just needs to be addressed before the narrative sets in. Because, again, people have the first 5 or 6 games of the regular season in their minds, and they have the 3-game losing streak in their minds when they think that Kansas City is a defensive step below the rest of the top 4. And they're not. This is, bar none, the worst defensive performance they have put in all season.
No question.
You could not have predicted for that. Orlando made Sharples, Cook, Almut Schultz at times, and of course Ellie Wheeler, albeit young rookie, so maybe you put an asterisk on it, made that entire back line look foolish on multiple occasions. They never got comfortable throughout the game.
Yeah. Banda's movement was so good and so defense stretching that by the time she's ready to receive the ball in the center of the box, the defense is already inherently spread because of the kinds of moves. She created with her diagonal runs enough space that there was also room for her to fill eventually in the center of the park. Mm-hmm. She was everywhere.
Yeah.
And on this chance, she takes, again, this speculative ball, beats her defender, and turns a chance that maybe only a handful of strikers in the world are going to consistently turn even into a shot, and then savagely she broke the camera behind the net with the shot.
Yeah, that's right.
Like she rifles that. I said this. I really think if Alma Schultz had been standing in exactly the spot the shot was going to, there's still a decent chance with how hard that ball is hit that it's ricocheting off her and going into the net.
Mm-hmm.
Banda just does Barbara Banda shit, which very few other players in the world are capable of.
And yet, after all of that, Kansas City found a way back in.
Correct.
But for some fluky finishing, Nichelle Prince and Temwa Chewinga could have easily pegged a couple back and grabbed a lead. And all of a sudden, it could have been 3-2.
That Chewinga chance in the 71st, where she, I think, ends up with 13 touches in a row.
Yeah.
Before taking her shot.
And the only vintage Chewinga dribbling sequence that she was able to get off all day.
And again, she's shepherded into a place where she's sort of relying on scooping from her back foot and just ends up with like not a very powerful shot from a good position.
Mm-hmm.
It was classic like bend, don't break against Temwa Chewinga.
Yeah.
Orlando kind of got away with one there.
Got a shot off of a headed cross in stoppage time. But other than that, if you only allow Temwa Chewinga 2 good looks all day, you did your job.
And that's what it is. It's Orlando did what nobody else has been able to do and just contained, merely contained.
Right. We joked with Joe Lloyd, like, you cannot stop Temwa Chewinga and you can't hope to contain her. Well, Seb Hines said, I have the audacity of hope. And it worked. And then, okay, I think I have been disassociating for about 24 hours about the Marta goal. I don't know if it's truly sunk in what we witnessed in the 82nd minute there.
First off, this is maybe my favorite Barbara Banda moment of the game, and I'm including that finish.
The tackle that leads to...
Kayla Sharples doesn't even make that bad a touch.
Yeah.
It is just Barbara Banda's aggression and her work rate that stabs in and takes the ball off Sharples. I think Sharples will probably look back at this game and have several moments she regrets.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I don't even think she had that bad a game. I just think Barbara Banda's that good.
But also, Banda didn't put in like a super great defensive season for a forward, especially when you compare what Chewinga was able to do on both sides of the ball. But Banda, for all of her struggles in the stretch run of the regular season, it is quite clear, based on how she ripped the heart out of the live body of the Chicago Red Stars, and what she did, and her involvement in all 3 of Orlando's goals today against a far superior opponent. She, I think, is just sort of in a mindset of like, I'm not losing.
No,
And that tackle to trigger the Marta dribble is exactly that kind of philosophy. It's like, I am not losing right now.
I also want to say, Marta did not have a good game until this moment. She had a fine game. There were elements of her game that were like offensively limiting at points for Orlando.
Because she's 38 years old. She doesn't have the pace anymore, but the Banda tackle and the aggressiveness with which Kansas City was pushed so high up because they were trying to go
chase the game,
trying to grab an equalizer, that Banda's tackle gave Marta acres of space. And then, even after that mazy dribble into the box, she's got Sharples and Cook not facing their own goal. Their footwork was good. They got themselves in good positions. And then Marta was just like, you know what? I'm going to remind people of my footwork from the 2007 World Cup semifinal. And she actually even said that to Seb Salazar and Ali Krieger on ABC after the game. She was like, yeah, I kind of wanted to have like a little feeling of my glory days. That's not a verbatim quote, but it was something like that. And that's exactly what that goal was, because I need to describe this goal? Everybody's seen it. People have seen it from different angles, which are miraculous. The synchronized swimming.
I would call it synchronized divers. Yes, she turns Cook and Sharples into Olympic gold medalist synchronized divers.
By getting them to bite at the same time and then moving the ball to her left foot. And then doing the same thing to Schultz after she comes off of her line. And then the coup de grace, Haley Mace, is too late.
The final tackle that could have come in is still a split second too late. It's an exercise in like perfect timing. Marta just reminds us why she's the GOAT.
It also reminds you why like touch can be a veteran skill, because it's not reliant on lung capacity or muscle mass or your ability to recover from injury. You just need to have the muscle memory of doing this every day of your life for almost 40 years. There's never been a better women's soccer player when she was in her prime than this person. If you're going to give her all of that territory, turns out you're still going to lose to her.
Marta had just enough pace, 38-year-old pace, but good enough touch to keep the defenders on the back foot and drive them deeper and deeper and deeper. Deke both of them in, I'll say it, a humiliating way.
Yeah.
An Allen Iverson crossover ankle break of a dribble. And then to dribble around Schultz, which is like the coup de grace of this all. Because Schultz is reading this, and I think must have been thinking when she saw both Cook and Sharples just slide on by, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm really hosed here, aren't I?
Mm-hmm.
And Schultz throws a hand at it. Marta's touch is deft enough to get around that, and it's kind of just game, set, match at that point.
Well, you say that, and yet you look at the full game sort of top line numbers, and you would think, wow, KC really played them close. 3-2 scoreline, 1.8 to 1.6 on the non-penalty XG, 3-2 on quality chances. They had more touches in the box. They had more shots in the box. They had more field tilt. They had a lot of unlucky finishing. But what that doesn't tell you is that all of that's entirely driven by game state. 5 of their 11 shots in the box across the entire day come in the 27 minutes, that's normal time plus stoppage time, after Marta's goal. And if you look at like game flow map, they really don't have much control of the game until they start running things after Marta makes it 3-1. That's something that does not bother a team like Orlando, who, barring Gotham, defended the box better than anyone else in the NWSL in the regular season. And then you look at the XG per shot, and after everything I just told you about Kansas City, 0.08. That's a worse than average figure. They never produced the singular chance to give themselves the opportunity to equalize or win. They got a couple of lifelines in the Carriabello handball that led to DiBernardo's penalty, and then all of the stoppage time through injury and VAR. And they just still couldn't get it over the line. It came very close. Again, the models really differ on how valuable Kayla Sharples' header is right at the death. And I think you got to say, when you are running onto a header from across at that acute of an angle from like 8 yards out, I believe ASA's 0.14 XG value more than I believe FBref's 0.62.
I mean, Sharples is quite tall. He was playing a center forward's role at that point in the game. Sharples just kind of doesn't take the right route to that ball.
That's right.
And that ball is maybe just a hair high.
Yeah.
It's just like not a great read.
Yeah.
But the net is open, empty, and gaping. And again, this is where like I think Sharples will want that back, and I think it is harsh to think she must finish this. If there was a chance in this game that I think was closer to 0.62, it's probably Banda's goal than it is Sharples' empty back post header.
Yeah, if we're talking about disputed XG values, yeah, I think I lean that way as well.
It's just such a hard chance.
Yeah.
But again, it speaks to how good Kansas City was all season, that even though, as you say, Orlando really bossed this game and that most of Kansas City's attacking ended up being really game state driven, the Kansas City has a chance, even as good as 0.14 XG on an empty net back post header, to be within a hair of going to the final on a day in which they were outplayed. Kansas City, so good.
We said about Orlando in the semifinal that not every team puts up like 4.5 XG on a bad team. And similarly here, not every team generates as much offense in game state influenced final minutes as Kansas City did here. So you do have to give Kansas City credit. This was an excellent team that just picked the wrong day to kind of have the worst game of their season.
And Orlando deserves credit for causing Kansas City to have the worst game of their season.
Yep.
That's absolutely right. All right. So, Evan, I know that we will break this down in further detail as we get on in this week, as we drop what will be a lot of final preview content. Just a couple of a day out of these two weekend games, and having seen what Trevor's ELO model says, which is 54% to the Spirit, 46% to the Pride. What is your gut telling you right now about who wins at California Pizza Kitchen on Saturday?
God, I don't know. I mean, 54-46 genuinely is a coin flip. It's not influenced by home field advantage because it's a neutral site.
Devastating that for the second year in a row,
potentially having
one of the best teams in the league is within a hair of hosting their final,
and they get booted in the semifinal. Yeah, I think that the model is picking up on Washington's ability to generate more high XG chances from just how good they are in transition. And I wonder to what extent that is going to matter on Saturday. It's still hard for me to say that I have like a ton of confidence in Orlando winning, but I also don't have really any confidence in Washington winning either. This is actually one of the most finely poised finals we've ever seen, because there was the run from 2016 to 2019 where it was clear as day that North Carolina / Western New York was going to win. And when Portland won in 2017, it was a genuine upset. 2021 was contested between two teams that probably didn't deserve to be there, Chicago and Washington at the end of the day. Kansas City were the underdogs in 2022, and it panned out like that. Last year, similar to 2021, where maybe I think I would have given Seattle maybe the slightest of edges, but it's not because I thought there was like such a high caliber of play existing between both sides. I think this might be, since like 2015 between Seattle and Kansas City, that we have had two incredibly good teams contest the final. It's difficult for me to say who's got an edge here. And it's also difficult for me to say like who can exploit variance here.
I'll say this.
Yeah.
Last year's final, I know you broke the direction of Seattle and I broke the direction of Gotham. But it was two of us commenting on borderline playoff teams and teams that we both thought had statistical profiles that weren't particularly impressive, but left them relatively well matched. This year's final is between two teams that have very impressive statistical profiles, finished 1-2 in the league, which frankly is not unfair, and then were deserved winners in both of their playoff games on some level.
Yeah. The season series between these two teams, Orlando won both games by an aggregate scoreline of 5-2, but the non-penalty XG split was 2.8 to 1.5 in Washington's favor. How do you call this contest? Like, Orlando got legitimately outplayed in both of those games, and they won both of them. The only thing that maybe you could argue is that without Uli Madasar and Croy Bethune, Washington can't roll out their death lineup. But
it's not mattered.
Kawasi and Hatch and Santos are all healthy and are all available and demonstrated why this team didn't really skip a beat. Somebody sent a data visualization around that showed where Washington's like progression value in the attacking third was coming from post Bethune. Bethune is the axis around which everything spins up until she fucks up her knee. After that, I had always kind of felt like it was Santos that was providing the most value because she still is the playmaker. She still is the string puller in the middle of the park. But the players that are actually like moving the ball into dangerous areas and being those really threatening progression weapons are Hatch and Kawasi, and especially Kawasi. That just demonstrates that if Santos has a bad game, someone's going to step in. If Hatch can't get on the ball, someone else is going to step in. If Rodman isn't 100%, which he might not be, someone's going to step in. What does Orlando do about that? Well, they also have one of the best center back pairings in the league. They have two central midfielders who don't seem all that interested in letting you get by them. They have a great left back in Carrie Abello, who, despite one or two mistakes, still had a very good game against Kansas City. Can you say that playing Corey Dyke against Roseman Kawasi might mean advantage Washington? I could see an argument there, but that's a very small, very fine margin. Because then on the other side of it, you're going to have a young Esme Morgan marking Barbara Banda. That's not going to be fun.
This is so level.
Yeah.
And my gut is telling me that right now Barbara Banda is basically unplayable. And I know she went off with what looked like a little bit of a muscle injury, but she was laughing it up on the sideline. I think she's going to be just fine.
I think so too.
I am not sure because Sharples and Cook were so good once that pairing was figured out until they faced Barbara Banda.
Yeah. For a second time, that pairing. Because that pairing had faced her once before and did just fine against her. Yeah. Then they unlocked something.
McKeown and Morgan are very good, but right now, Barbara Banda is absolutely terrifying and kind of unplayable. If I have to pick between these two teams, it's advantage Orlando right now, says my gut.
Yeah,
I just also want to be clear. My gut was wrong about both games last weekend. So what does my gut know?
It's tough for me to say where the loudest signal comes in with Banda's performance because she was the best player in the NWSL before the Olympics break and then couldn't find net after the Olympics break, and her XG per 96 was cut in half. And then all of a sudden, in the playoffs, she's been an absolute monster. Have these 2 games meant positive regression, and we're seeing the real Banda? Or is it a blip, and she could potentially cool off? I don't know. I'll say this. If Orlando wins, they'll deserve it. But for the sake of making things interesting, I'll say that this is Washington as your 2024 NWSL champion.
My gut says Orlando, but my gut's doing whatever.
Yeah.
My gut can't handle cheese. so,
yep.
I think that this has been a great season. And as far as the top end of it has gone, we had a top 4 that were totally worthy, a top 4 that ran chalk in the playoffs, and have turned into a top 2 that we get a top 2 final. I would feel wrong if we both had picked the same side.
Yeah.
That's how close this game is.
Yeah.
And I think if you'd picked Orlando, I would have found a way to negotiate my way into a Washington position.
It's not hard. It's not hard to negotiate your way into either position. That's what's great about it. We are going to be in Kansas City for the championship, and we are going to be hosting a meetup in concert with KC Blue Crew, the supporter group for the Kansas City Current, who are organizing an event at Johnny's Tavern P&L in the Power and Light district of Kansas City on Grand Boulevard. That's going to be this Friday, November 22nd at 7 p.m. Come by anytime after 7 o'clock. We will be there. We'll have our own little table to hang out at, but I think it's just going to be a really fun event because the supporter groups are doing a great job of welcoming people into the city and trying to make this event as fun as possible. And I know they're hurting because their team will not be playing in it. So it's an even more generous and magnanimous gesture that they are doing everything that they're doing on Friday and Saturday for the championship. So if you are in town for the NWSL championship and you are in town a day early on Friday, November 22nd, come by Johnny's Tavern P&L on Grand Boulevard in Kansas City anytime after 7 o'clock. Raise a glass with us. We'd love to talk and we'd love to meet everybody in person. And in the meantime, if you haven't done so already, rate us, review us, follow us, rate us 5 stars if you're going to rate us at all. Drop a review in the podcast app of your preference if you are able to do so. Tell all your friends about us. Follow us on social media at XOwnGoals. That's the letter XOwnGoals. We're pretty much a blue sky family now. We're not really doing much on Twitter anymore. If you think that we've made an own goal, please email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com. We are going to put out our Patreon bonus episode on Friday because we have some very special guests that we're going to be talking to in Kansas City on Thursday when we're in town. We will also have a special bonus episode on main feed that'll come out on Saturday morning, I think, that will do a formal tactical preview of the championship. We'll be speaking with some Washington Spirit and Orlando Pride experts. So stay tuned for that. And also, I think we're going to maybe launch a TikTok channel.
It's an ambitious week. We're going to try to get it all.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of content, more or less in real time on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So watch out on Instagram. Watch out, see if we're going to pump out some TikTok stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. We are going to bring the sights, the sounds, and the emotions of the NWSL Championship to you. So look forward to all of that. So we will speak to you again on Patreon on Friday. Have a great NWSL Championship week.
Bye.